Hey and welcome to this abbreviated playthrough of Doom 0.99. This was released on the 10th of December 1993. This is the original version of Doom that was released to the public. And yeah, we're just going to play through this today to cap off the series of looking at the alpha and betas of Doom. Interestingly, this has 3 unique demo loops: E1M2, E1M5 and E1M7. To my knowledge, these are not used in the retail versions of Doom, so I think this is the only place you can actually get to see these demo loops. You'll also notice that there's no sound. Unfortunately, I couldn't get the sound drivers to work in DOSBox, so unfortunately we're just going to have to kind of live with that. As you can see here, 3 episodes, that's what you got back in the day, and there's no Nightmare difficulty. Nightmare would come after the release of the original game, so Nightmare is actually not included in this release here. So let's dive in. Now, it's noteworthy that there are quite a few changes, not huge changes, but little subtle changes to the way that these levels are kind of presented at various points. But as you can see here at the start, things are very much the same. I'm playing this on ultra violence, and I am using a keyboard because I have to play this in DOSBox. Couldn't get this to work in modern source ports. There's no switch here. That would actually be added later on to sort of make the level more of a circle for death matches. But as you can see, the armor is here. At one point this was a secret room in development, so you had to sort of hit the wall behind that. You can see here when we look outside, things are very much the same. I'm gonna shoot these enemies here. So one interesting thing about this version of Doom is that the armor system is slightly broken. I mean, at least from a visual perspective. You'll see it as we make our way through the levels, but basically the armor counter does not stop at 200%, it kind of keeps going, but the health one doesn't reach 200, it stops at 199. So as you'll see when we're playing through, it's going to get quite interesting to see how high we can push that armor count. We'll make our way towards the end of the level here. So you can see they have implemented the proper fireballs for the imps at this stage. If you remember in some of the previous alpha videos, they didn't have the fireball, they actually had like a weird sort of diamond fireball that would ultimately show up in Heretic. So this secret is here, but what is noteworthy is that the secret here with the elevator is not present in this version of the game. So you can see we tried to trigger it there, no way to get up there. And if you look outside here, they haven't actually put the texture misalignment there to sort of indicate there's something there. So there's actually no secret there, which makes this level a bit smaller. Not hugely important, but it is noteworthy to see that, and it kind of gives you an idea of how they were sort of changing these levels right up until release. Hangar overall is pretty much the same level as you remember, except for the absence of that secret. Now, the interesting thing with Nuclear Plant here is that we've seen this level extensively throughout these alpha videos, mainly because it changed so much at various points. So as you can see, we're taking out the zombie men here. So I'm convinced that this lift is behaving a bit differently from what we'd normally expect. So I don't remember the lifts sort of being so like sudden like this. Like the behavior of the lifts in this version of the sort of pre-release here is very interesting. Like you can see here, like it doesn't behave like exactly as you'd expect. So as we head into this secret here, I don't remember there being this many items in here. It kind of feels like there's a lot more things in here. I remember the armor backpack, and I don't think the other items were there. So I probably have to go and check the other version of this level, the final version. But you can see that this bit has been fixed. So we saw in the previous video that they actually had elevators instead of the staircases on either side, which, you know, completely slows down the pace of this part of the level. So we're going to just shoot all these shotgunners here. You can see that they've got the health and armor bonuses in the game here, which is really cool. We can grab the chain gun here. The chain gun actually behaves as intended. When we last saw this, it didn't have the little sort of bumps at the end, so it was a lot more smoother, and honestly it looked a bit weird, I'm not gonna lie. You can see they've also closed this part off finally, so there is a part behind it, so you can see that there is like a very small room behind it, but you can't gain access to it. But in the previous video, when we were exploring this area, it kind of all linked together, making this all like one giant area. But now you need to get the red key to come through here, which is pretty interesting. Just gonna take down the imp there. So this maze area was kind of a hot mess for the longest time. In previous videos, we ended up kind of coming in here, but there really wasn't much to do in here. You were just kind of wandering around. It didn't even link together as like a proper maze, so you can see that they've finally got their act together and made this into a sort of more coherent maze for the player to actually explore. It's kind of interesting because when we came in here in the alpha, there wasn't any sort of indication of what this was supposed to be. This whole area kind of just felt like it was here for no reason at all. This secret is here, good to see. But yeah, I got the sense playing through the alpha versions of this, they didn't know what they were doing with that area, the maze area, and I feel like in the end they just kind of settled on it being like a big secret area for the player to optionally explore if they fancy it. So as we make our way through said maze, there's a bunch of enemies who are active and exploring to try and hurt us. Take out the zombie men there. So it is interesting to come back and play with keyboard only. Back in the day when we had just the Shareware version of this game, this is exactly how I would have been playing it on the original DOS, because we had a ball mouse and that thing was awful to use. Awful. So we had to teach ourselves to use keyboard only. So that's how I'm playing these levels here, because I have to play this through DOSBox. I did try to get it to play through several source ports, but none of them played nicely. So you can see this area has also reached its final form. This whole area here went through so many massive revisions during the alpha and the betas. We've seen just some weird attempts to kind of make that area different. Even the toxic bit at the end there, it kind of went through multiple revisions. It's one of those areas that just drastically changed through development, and it's interesting to see how that kind of came to be in the end. But you can see that this secret is indeed here, so we're going to head down here just to look around here. You'll find with a lot of this is really the final versions of a level. It's just that some of these have been changed and altered. You'll be able to tell that mostly just for gameplay purposes, I think, just to kind of reduce the sort of downtime. Yeah, we still can't get outside there. So let's exit the level here. Nuclear Plant is like probably one of those levels that's gone through so many radical changes in development. So we open the door here. The shotgunner is actually way more forward than he is in the final version of the game there. Because in the final version, when you play on Ultraviolence, he's alongside the imp there, but for some reason in this version he's right in front of the door, so he's right on the player as they're kind of making their way through the door there. I wonder what made them change their minds on that. So I'm just going to quickly look down here. I'm not sure if they removed the barrel there or not. Usually there's a barrel behind the imps that you can use to sort of kill most of them in one shot. But I'm not sure if it's because they blew it up before I got to them, or if there wasn't a barrel there at all, but yeah, for some reason there wasn't a barrel there. Let's have a look down here. We're not doing too well in the health department here, so I'm just going to be very careful as we kind of make our way out into this open area here. I mean, this room is pretty iconic in Doom. I mean, most people who've played Doom probably would recognize this room straight away, but what you may not be aware of when we kill this imp over here is that when you come to the other side here, if you turn around, there isn't actually a switch to raise this middle toxic pit up. And the reason for that is because the switch is actually on the other side over here. Now, the fun thing is, I remember this as a kid. I actually remember that switch being there because that was one of the things that surprised me when I finally got to play Ultimate Doom like years later. So that's one change I do remember from this version. And I think it works better, I think, because otherwise that middle pool becomes a real hazard for a lot of players. It actually makes it a lot more difficult. Also, that key is not clipping totally correctly. At least it doesn't look like it is. It kind of looks like it's sunken into the floor slightly, which is a bit weird. But yeah, I imagine that they moved that switch down to the bottom of the toxic pit because a lot of players, I can imagine, fell into that, and that would just restart the level for them. And to be fair, the opening to this level is pretty nasty on the harder difficulties. I do think that this is the first level out of the 3 that we've played so far where the player is actually truly challenged. I think that the first 2 levels are nice, and I don't think there are any moments where the player is under any true threat. This is the first level where the difficulty really spikes, and I do like it for that. It's also worth considering the context of when this Doom came out, because this might be 0.99 for Doom, but this was released as the version 1.0 candidate, so a lot of people will have experienced this version of Doom first if they were to get their hands on the Shareware version when it first arrived in December of 1993. Now, obviously, there were further revisions made to this and further Shareware releases made, because obviously, even when the game was released, it were making lots of changes. So this is probably the purest form of what Doom looks like back at release, because a lot of the fixes and a lot of the changes that would be made in future revisions that we kind of take advantage of in the modern era are not present in this one. There's actually a few bugs as well that kind of make their way into this version that were kind of cleaned up in future iterations. So for example, this version of the Shareware doesn't have the nightmare difficulty. That would only come under version 1.2, which eventually did actually add in the nightmare difficulty and the ability for monsters to respawn. And that armor glitch that we're calling a glitch, but actually it was just uncapped, I assume, wasn't fixed until 1.4, where it was actually capped at 200% finally. So in the very early days of Doom, a lot of these quirks that we're seeing were just part of the experience, and it's really interesting to come back and just kind of see how the game, even after release and even in the months that came after the game sort of reached the public, things were changing very rapidly for the game. Another interesting little tidbit from this early part of Doom life, people could actually use the Shareware version of Doom to load up custom PWADs. Now that's kind of crazy to think about, because when you think about it, a lot of custom levels that popped up in the early days of Doom in like 94, a lot of them just threw a lot of the enemies in that you wouldn't be able to play in this, and I can't imagine that id Software or anyone around them was particularly thrilled that people were probably downloading the Shareware version of Doom and then getting all that extra free content, so they never really had a reason to go out and buy the full retail game. It's just one of those funny oversights that I think in modern gaming you would definitely not see that, because I don't know if there'd be a game in the modern age that allowed players to make custom content, because honestly that's one of the big reasons I feel Doom has survived as long as it has done, through the sheer quality and quantity of custom levels that people could just freely access. So I imagine if they'd known that was going to be such a big feature, it probably wouldn't have been allowed with the Shareware version out the gate. But how are they meant to know that was going to be like one of the biggest hooks for Doom as a long-term game? So what I'm going to do, now that we've basically finished the third level here, I am going to jump ahead and I'm just going to kind of go level to level, and I'm just going to talk about the major differences between this and what you probably expect if you played this in the modern times between those levels, just because I feel that while playing through all these levels is really fun and really cool, ultimately you've seen 99.9% of this many times, and I'm sure a lot of people just want to kind of see the differences. So let's get right to that. What's really unique is that E1M9 doesn't really get any major updates from this candidate until the modern times. It's one of the few levels that remains completely unchanged from this version through to the modern iterations of these levels, and I think part of the reason for that is just because it's a secret level. I feel like that they put it here and it was obviously not a focus, and if there were no major issues or changes needed to be made, I can imagine that they were like, well, we're not gonna make changes here. So if you're curious, E1M9 is basically what you'd play in the modern games. So the obvious change in E1M4 that everyone wants to talk about is the swastika room, and for good reason, because in this version it is present, it is very much there, and in this room here, when this platform drops down, it is very clearly a swastika. And what's interesting is, instead of removing it straight away, in version 1.2 they actually tried to flip it so that it changed slightly, but then by version 1.25 they changed it into what it is in the modern times. But yes, this is slightly awkward, and I can totally understand why they removed it, just because it is what it is, isn't it? Let's be honest. Another little change that was made in this room, in Deathmatch, a player actually spawns in the middle of that symbol, and in the early versions of this level, if someone didn't come into this room, that player would actually get stuck up there, so the spawn point is actually moved away from inside that structure. Quite a little fun trap for the player that gets stuck up there. For E1M5, the big difference ends up being the complete absence of the secret area through the yellow door. So normally there'd be a lift here that would lift you up and take you to the secret area with the extra ammunition and health, but it actually doesn't exist in this version at all, which is pretty interesting because it makes you wonder why they added that in, because it's such an optional place anyway in the final release. I've always kind of felt it didn't really need to be there, and it's kind of funny coming back and seeing that it wasn't there until it was actually added in. If you're curious, it did get added in version 1.2. So in E1M6, the only major change I want to draw attention to is the fact that this shotgun here is actually out of bounds, and it means that you can't get 100% kills on this level without cheating, which is pretty funny when you think about it. So you can see here, he's actually stuck in this little sort of walkway here, and there's no way for the player to actually get to him or kill him because he's obviously stuck inside a wall. And interestingly, this stayed this way until version 1.666, so it was actually this way for quite a while. This wasn't changed in the immediate aftermath of the game, so obviously this wasn't considered a high priority. The other final change I want to draw attention to is the fact that there isn't actually a switch here. So there's a secret switch there in the modern versions of this level that lets you go back to the starting point of the level, but in this version you kind of have to hope that you make that landing there. This is also the only version of this level where there's actually a visual glitch. If you look back at the structure of the level when these steps are rising here, you can kind of see maybe, let's see if we can trigger it. There's actually a visual glitch because of the number of sectors on screen. It's too much. The setting was actually set too low at this point. I'm seeing if we can set it. I don't think we can. I don't think I've got the skills to make that happen. But yeah, in this version of the shareware, it's actually possible to cause a big visual glitch when you look back. But yeah, we're pretty much done with the shareware version of Doom here. It's been really fun getting to go back and kind of re-experience this, because this has brought back a few memories from when I played way back in the day, because the shareware version of this is how I experienced Doom, and I vaguely remember the armor not being capped, and I remember the switch not being in the toxic pool, so it's nice to kind of get to remember all that after so many years and coming back to experience all this again. It's been really fun. One final thing I'll show you is that obviously when you finish here, you get the big prompt to go and buy the retail version of the game. Remember guys, go and buy retail Doom. I hear it's going to be a big game. This actually gets updated in future versions of this, so it doesn't actually have the red text. But let me know what you thought of this shareware version of Doom. Do you remember this? Did you play this back in the day? Let me know in the comments, and thank you so much for watching.